Good morning, Crossway. Whether you're in the room or at home online, would you please stand and sing with us this morning?
But he brought me into his love for me, his love for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last he has ransomed me, his grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes to this. What a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus. Didn't want heaven without us. So Jesus, you brought heaven down. Sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. Death could not hold you. The veil tore before you. You silenced the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival, you have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus.
Good morning. Welcome to Crossway. You can have a seat. It's so good to see you here this morning. And if you're joining us online, we are so glad that you are taking the space and the time to join with us this morning. We know there's a lot of things you could be doing and a lot of places you could be. And we're just so grateful that you've come to worship with us and to learn more about Jesus with us. You know, one of the things I've really missed during this time of not being, during the time we weren't together, was being able to stand in the back, waiting to come out here and just listening to your voices as you raise them up in love and worship to our Savior. It is absolutely amazing. You know, before the quarantine, I had the opportunity to volunteer over in our children's ministry, and that was an exciting thing. Those kids really know how to worship and how to express their love for Jesus through their worship. But it was an incredible opportunity to be able to work with those children. I read an article this week that talked about how half of all believers in Jesus believe in him before the age of 12. And that by the age of 9, the moral foundation has already been formed. So we have a very heavy responsibility to be ministering and to pouring out truth to these children while they are still in a place where they are readily receiving the gospel. It is the teachers and the leaders and the volunteers every single week that take this mission very seriously, and it is us here in this room that give to this ministry to ensure that God's heart for children is being met here in our church. And so when we give this morning, you are giving to this children's ministry to help these children begin and grow a relationship with Jesus, but you're also helping other ministries in our church that are all focused on that same mission. So we're going to give now, and if you are here in this room, we have some volunteers that'll be walking around with some buckets, and you can just raise up your hand and get their attention, and they will come to you. Now, if you are online or if you are here in person, you can go to crosswaychurch.com/give. You can give securely that way. You can also text any amount to 84321, or you can give on our new church app. Will you please pray with me? God, thank you for this amazing opportunity we have to reach people for you, starting with our children. And God, I just pray that as we give so with such joy and with such love. May our hearts beat the same as yours, that people come to know you and that people are able to grow in their relationship with you. Bless our giving today. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Well, good morning. So good to see everybody today, and glad you're able to join us. If you're joining us online or you're joining us in the room, I'm just so pumped that you're here. We are kicking off a brand new sermon series today entitled Beneath the Surface. And what we're doing in this sermon series is we're talking about emotions. When you look at the world that we live in today, with everything that's been going on with COVID-19 and all the implications of COVID-19 and all the ways that it's changed our lives, and when you look at the presidential election and everything that it brings, and then on top of that you add the racial tensions in our country, all these things collectively have created a context where for many of us, if not most of us, there are some very, very powerful emotions that are bubbling just beneath the surface. And so for the next few weeks, what I want to do is I want to talk about those emotions that many of us find ourselves navigating during this time. And the reason why I want to spend some time talking about them is not merely just to talk about what's going on, but I think these are important to talk about because they're powerful emotions, and when you and I get them wrong, when you and I handle them improperly, when we don't handle them in a healthy way, they can be huge and devastating consequences. For many of us, if we don't handle these emotions that we're feeling right now, if we don't handle them in a healthy way, for some of us, it's going to mess up your marriage. Maybe you're one of those people, when you got married, you had this idea, we're going to grow old together, and we're going to be that really, really cute old couple that are still wildly and madly in love with each other, one of those couples that everybody admires. And maybe that was your dream, and I hope that it was. But listen, for some of you, if you don't handle these emotions correctly, if you don't handle them in a healthy way, it will wreck that dream. For some of us, if we don't handle these emotions correctly, it'll mess up our relationship with our kids. I don't know about you, but for me as a parent, I want to raise kids that love God. I want to raise kids that are men and women of character and a whole bunch of other things. But also as a parent, I want to raise kids in such a way that when they're old and they don't have to listen to me anymore and they don't have to be around me, they still want to. They still want to be around me, and they still want to have a conversation with me. And I'm guessing that for many of you, that's true. When you think about the future that you want or the future that you long for with your adult children, that may be something that you hope for too. But listen, if you do not handle the emotions that are going on beneath the surface of your life right now very well, for some of you, it will destroy that opportunity, that dream you have with your kids. For others of us, if we don't handle this correctly, it'll mess up our finances. For others of us, it might mess up our reputation, perhaps a reputation that you built over the course of your entire life. For some of us, if we don't handle it correctly, it'll mess up our physical health. And for some of us, if we don't handle these particular emotions in a proper way, it may even lead you to a place where you actually consider suicide. A place that maybe for many of you, you never even imagined you would go. A place you never thought you would find yourself. So this morning and for the next few weeks, I want to talk about these emotions underneath the surface that have huge implications in your life and in mine. And today, I want to start off by talking about the emotion of anger. It seems like everybody everywhere is just angry. In fact, as I look throughout the course of my life, I think that people are angrier now than they have ever been at any point in my entire life. Chances are pretty high that if you aren't personally angry or dealing with anger, you know somebody who's angry. And if you don't know somebody who's angry, it's probably because you don't have a Facebook account. People are just... they're just angry. And we get angry about all kinds of things, don't we? We get angry when the service at the restaurant isn't what we want it to be or think it should be. We get angry when the store doesn't provide the service like we want it to, when we want it to happen. We get angry when we're inconvenienced. We're angry at politicians for things they did or didn't do recently during COVID-19. There are people that are angry about having to wear masks or being asked to wear masks. There are people who are angry because people aren't wearing masks. It just seems like that people are just generally angry. Recently, I read the story of a truck driver that was behind an 85-year-old man in traffic. And of course, the 85-year-old man was driving like 85-year-old people sometimes do, slow and extraordinarily cautious. Well, it was frustrating the truck driver because he was stuck behind this 85-year-old man who eventually decided to pull off over into a gas station to refuel his car. The truck driver drove about a quarter of a mile down the road before he decided to pull over. He got out of his truck, ran as fast as he could a quarter of a mile back to the gas station, found the 85-year-old man, beat him up, and then ran back to the truck and drove off. It just seems like people are just angry. And I'm guessing it might be something that you're struggling with. And for clarity, it's not like I don't struggle with it either. Anger is actually something that I deal with it. And interestingly, in my life, it doesn't seem to be the big things that trip me up when it comes to anger. It's almost always the little things. For instance, I get angry when I feel like I have to deal with people who are bad drivers. People who I perceive to be bad drivers just instantly irritate me. And since we're talking about driving, let me make a little bit of a public service announcement here. On-ramps are for speeding up. You should be going the speed of traffic when you get off the on-ramp. Just kind of a little public service announcement. You're in church, consider it a freebie. But listen, people who I perceive to be bad drivers, they just aggravate me. You know another thing that makes me angry? When my kids take my charger. I buy every single one of them their own chargers. And because they lose it at a pace that is nearly impossible to fathom, I buy them a new one almost every couple weeks. But still, they take mine. And it just grinds on me, just bugs me to death. Another thing that bothers me, that makes me angry, is my weed eater. Weed eaters were invented by Satan. Especially when that stupid thing the cord doesn't come out right. You have to keep rethreading it. It's just maddening. I have done some of the most ungodly things when I was angry at my weed eater. But I struggle with anger too, and God knew that anger was going to be one of those emotions that you and I wrestle with and have to deal with an awful lot. So in Ephesians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul sits down to write a letter to a church that he started in a city called Ephesus. In the first part of his letter, he writes about some theology. He kind of unpacks some theology for the Christians in Ephesus. And then in the second half of the letter, he talks to them about some of their practical outworkings of the theology that he has just taught them. And in the second half of his letter, he touches on the subject of anger. And here's what he says. He says, in your anger, do not sin. So Paul starts out by acknowledging, look, anger is going to be a part of the human experience. It's going to be part of what you and I navigate. Now, on top of that, he wants us to know that anger in and of itself is not a sin. It's not a sin for you to be angry. It's what you do with it that becomes sinful or righteous. It's how you and I choose to respond. If you and I choose to respond poorly, then the anger becomes sinful and destructive and unproductive. If we choose to respond to it correctly, if we choose to deal with it correctly, then it becomes productive and righteous and godly. So he starts out by letting us know, look, it's not necessarily a sin. It's what you do with it that becomes sinful. Now he continues, and I think he continues and says this next thing because he knew that 9 times out of 10, when you and I make a choice regarding our anger, that we were going to choose incorrectly. He knew we were going to choose the wrong path most of the time, so he warns us. He says, do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. In other words, what Paul's saying is, he's saying, look, deal with it. You need to address the anger in your life before it becomes sinful. He's saying, look, you need to deal with it properly before it becomes bitter or bitterness. Now, he continues in the next verse, and he says, and do not give the devil a foothold. That word foothold in the Greek language is an interesting word. It can be translated as don't give the devil an opportunity, or don't give the devil a location, or don't give the devil a room. What Paul's saying is he's saying, look, if we don't handle our anger correctly, what happens is we can end up giving the devil a room in our house. Or we can allow him through the gateway or the doorway of anger to take up a place in our heart. Now, let me kind of pause here and say that this explains why, for some of you, your marriage is going the way that it's going. This explains why, for some of you, you have the reputation that you have. This explains for some of us why our family situation is the way that it is. It explains for some of us why our mental health is what it is. Paul warns, he says, look, fire or anger, it's not a sin, but what you do with it really matters. It's kind of like fire. Fire, in one setting, is good and healthy and productive, like when you use it in a fireplace. But if you go out to the woods and you find a dry area and you throw a match down and you let the fire run wild, it's wildly and unbelievably destructive. So Paul says, look, what you need to do is be angry, but don't sin. So how exactly do you and I do that? How do we actually become angry and not sin? Because let's be honest, or at least I'll be honest for me, 9 times out of 10, I don't pull it off very well. So how exactly do we do that? Well, in order to find an answer to that question, I want to take a look at a day where Jesus became angry. Because in that moment when he became angry, he modeled for us what it looks like to be angry and not sin. So if you have a Bible or a Bible app and you want to follow along that way, I'll be in Mark chapter 11. If you don't have either of those things, don't worry about it. All this stuff will be up on the screens for you. But before we jump into reading the specific story, let me give you some context that's important for you to understand in order for you to make sense of what Jesus is doing when he got mad. So by the time we pull onto the scene in Mark chapter 11, it's Passover. Passover is the biggest event on the Jewish calendar every single year. I mean, it is the big deal. The Passover was a celebration where they would remember and celebrate when the Israelites were freed from Egyptian slavery underneath the leadership of Moses. It was something that had happened centuries prior to when we get to Mark chapter 11, but still, every single year, it was the big deal. It was the big celebration. And because of that, it was expected that if you were a Jewish person and you were able to do so, that you would make your way to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, and as a part of that celebration, that you would go to the temple and you would make a sacrifice or an offering in the temple. For the Jewish people, Passover meant a lot of things. It meant an opportunity to spend with family. It meant an opportunity to catch up with old friends. It was definitely an opportunity to eat some really good food. But for many of them, if not most of them, the central thing that happened during the Passover celebration was when they could go to the temple and they could make their offering. It was important to them because for them, that's how they gained forgiveness for their sins, but also it was a sign that they were a faithful Jewish person. They were faithful and obedient. So literally, all kinds of Jewish people, faithful Jewish people from all over the known world would make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. And for a moment, I want you to imagine with me what the Passover experience would be like. The Passover experience, you'd show up to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was, by ancient standards, a pretty good-sized city. It was about 40,000, but during Passover, it would swell to over 250,000 people. There would be people all over the city. Everywhere you look, there were people dressed in colorful clothing and probably speaking at least a dozen or more different languages. The streets were packed. All the hotel rooms were taken. And they're just people everywhere, crowded. The city was stretched to its limits, and everybody's trying their best to maneuver through the city to get to the temple so that they can make their offering. And Jesus and his disciples are no exception. They've made their way to the city just like every good Jewish person, and they're looking forward to that time where they'll be able to make their offering in the temple too. Now for Jesus, this is an emotional Passover. Every Passover is emotional for the Jewish people, but for Jesus, this one is exceptionally emotional because this is the final week of his life and he knows it. And so emotions are running really, really high for Jesus as he and the rest of everybody else make their way to the temple to make their offerings. Now the type of offering that a person would make would depend upon a number of things. It would depend on how much you made and where you were from and what kind of sins you wanted forgiveness for and a whole host of other things. But normally, almost every single offering involved an animal. Sometimes it would be a small animal like a dove, or it could be a big animal like an ox or a bull or something like that. But it almost always involved an animal, and there were rules about what kind of animals could be offered as a sacrifice. The animal had to be perfect and without blemish. It had to be healthy and clean looking, and those were the standards, which created an interesting dilemma for the pilgrims making their way to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. They had to decide, are we going to bring our animal with us for the offering, or are we going to try to buy it when we get there? If they tried to bring their offering, their animal with them, that was no small task. It required them to walk down these crowded, narrow roads, perhaps for days, if not weeks, to get to Jerusalem. They had to carry extra supplies to care for the animal. They had to constantly watch the animal to make sure that it didn't get hurt or harmed. And it had to work really, really hard to keep it clean and all that sort of stuff and healthy looking. And if they chose to go that route, it came with a risk, because it could be that they couldn't get it there and it got hurt, or even if they did get it there was the possibility that the person inspecting animals for the sacrifices would say, that's not good enough. And they would have gone through all that effort for absolutely nothing. So understandably, most pilgrims decided to purchase their animal for sacrifice when they got to Jerusalem. Now, because that's what most people chose, there were people who decided, well, we need to provide a service. There's a need, let's provide a service. And so when they got to Jerusalem, there would be people sitting in the court of the Gentiles, vendors, who would sell them an animal for their sacrifice. The court of the Gentiles was the biggest part of the temple, and it was designed so that anybody, anywhere could come and encounter God. It was supposed to be a place where, regardless of who you were, where you come from, what you've done, you're welcome here, and this is where you can encounter God. But these merchants set up shop there in the court of the Gentiles, and I think probably at first it was pretty above board. They just charged people and made a small profit. But over time, they started to realize, wait a minute, we have a corner on the market. They have to come here. They're going to do it. They're not going to bring their animals. And so they hiked the rates up. And they started charging people exorbitant fees for the animals that they were selling. I mean, it truly was nothing short of highway robbery. One commentator said it like this. He said, outside of Jerusalem, you could probably buy a dove for 4 pence, but when you went to the temple to buy a dove, they would charge you 75 pence. So if you've ever been to if you've ever been to Disney World, you know what this is like. You go in and you get robbed blind for things you wouldn't normally pay even a fraction of that for, right? And so they're ripping people off left and right. Now, on top of that, every single person who came was expected to pay a temple tax. But you couldn't just pay a temple tax with any currency. You had to use a specific currency. And if you were from out of town, you probably didn't have that currency on you. And so you needed somebody to do the exchange for the currency, to have the proper currency to pay the tax. So money changers also set up shop in the court of the Gentiles to help people be able to make the exchange so they could pay the tax. And I'm sure, again, at first it probably started off as a thing that was just there to meet a need. But they too, over time, started to realize, wait a minute, we've got a great business opportunity. We've got people who are stuck here and they need it. Let's make a lot of money off this thing. So they started messing with the exchange rates where they were literally, again, robbing people blind. Now, if there's a part of you that's hearing this going, that's ridiculous and that's frustrating and that's outlandish, now you understand how the people who are coming to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover felt. Now, if a person had a problem with all of this, they had a problem with the greed and the corruption and the hypocrisy and getting ripped off and getting taken advantage of, you could go talk to the authorities. And what the authorities would do is they would refer you to the Sadducees, who were in charge of the temple operations. The Sadducees were the rich religious leaders that had really, really nice houses not too far from the temple, who were also getting a cut of the profits from the vendors and the money changers. And they were very, very, very unlikely to side with any pilgrim that was upset with the greed and the corruption and everything else that was going on. And this is what was going on the day that Jesus became angry. So imagine the scene with me again. Jesus is making his way up the crowded steps to the temple, and he makes his way finally into the court of the Gentiles. And he looks around, and he sees things, and he hears things. And instead of seeing and hearing worshipers who are connecting with God and people growing in their faith, he looks around and he sees merchants and money changers who are taking advantage of people who probably can't afford to be taken advantage of. Instead of seeing what he should be seeing, he sees merchants doing business. He watches as these vendors argue with these patrons over the price of a cow or the price of a goat or the price of a sheep or the price of a dove. One vendor screaming out his price for it, another vendor screaming out his price for it. He looks over and he sees money changers, and he hears the sound of money. The ripoff that's happening. He hears the sound of animals, and he smells everything that goes along with all of that. And that's where we pick up the story in Mark chapter 11. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. So Jesus finally squeezes his way into the crowded court of Gentiles, where there are thousands is probably exaggeration, but hundreds of vendors all over the place. And he walks over to the very first one he can reach, and he just grabs the table and he flips it over. And in another version, another one of the Gospels actually tells us some more information. Jesus flips the table, and he takes some cord, and he fashions a whip, and he literally starts driving animals out. And he does this at vendor after vendor after vendor after vendor, money changer after money changer after money changer. You can hear the sound of coins going all over the place. You watch as the money changers scramble to try to pick up their coins that are rolling across the ground. Maybe there's some other people that are taking advantage of it, going, and walking off. They ripped me off. I might as well get mine, and then these animals are running all over the place. And Jesus just keeps flipping tables and saying, get out of here, driving out the animals. Hear the sound of animals afraid, trying to get out of Dodge. And eventually Jesus does it until literally every table has been turned and every animal has been driven out. And by that point in time, Jesus has made a scene. And everybody in the court of Gentiles, and perhaps everybody outside the temple too, is just standing there, watching Jesus flip tables and drive out animals. And Jesus is the quintessential teacher. He waits to the moment when he fully has everybody's attention. He waits to the moment when he realizes, they're ready for me to teach. And then Jesus decides to instruct. And here's what he says. Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations? Hey guys, wasn't God abundantly clear about what was supposed to happen here? Wasn't God abundantly clear about the purpose of his house? Wasn't God perfectly clear that he wants no part of people who take advantage of other people? Wasn't God clear that the corruption and greed and hypocrisy are not acceptable? Wasn't God clear that his house was supposed to be a place where everybody and anybody can encounter God? And then he continues and he says, but you've made it into a den of robbers. You've made it into a place where people who take advantage of and abuse other people hide out and scheme. You've turned it into a den of robbers. This was not what God intended. This is wrong. And this is the day that Jesus became angry. Now, in the time that I have remaining with you, I want to make 4 quick observations about the day that Jesus became angry. Because I think what Jesus does here is he models for us what we need to do if we are going to be angry and not sin. So the first observation I want to make about the day that Jesus became angry is this: anger for Jesus was not a way of life. This wasn't a normal state of being for Jesus. I think it's important that we don't miss what wasn't said to us by Mark, who tells us about this day that Jesus became angry. Mark doesn't say, hey, look, Jesus went to the temple like every Passover, and just like every Passover, Jesus lost his cool and started throwing things all over the place and made a scene. Mark doesn't say that. Mark doesn't say, hey, listen, Jesus showed up at the temple, and this is like the 4th or 5th day in a row he did it, and he got mad, did the same thing every single day. Mark doesn't say that. Mark doesn't tell us, hey, you wouldn't believe what this Pharisee said to Jesus when Jesus was, and Jesus just totally went off on him. It was unbelievable. It was epic. It was unbelievable. We don't read that. And the reason why we don't read that is because anger was not a characteristic. It was not characteristic of Jesus' life. It wasn't. In fact, the only reason this story stands out to us in the first place is because it seems so out of character for Jesus. When you and I are used to thinking about Jesus, you know what we're used to thinking about? His love. We're used to thinking about the moments when he fed people who were hungry. We're used to thinking about the moments where he healed people who were sick. We're used to thinking about how he would hang out with sinners and outcasts in the dregs of society. We're used to thinking about how Jesus forgave sinners. We're not used to thinking about his anger. And the reason why we're not used to thinking about his anger is because anger didn't define his life. His love defined his life, not his anger. Unfortunately, I think a lot of Christ followers aren't following Jesus' example here. And I think it's for that reason why James said it this way in James chapter 1. He said, my dear brothers and sisters. In other words, what he's saying is, hey, Christians, that's you, that's me. He's talking to us. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Or, hey, don't get distracted. Don't lose focus. In fact, this is so important, if you need to, pull out a pen and a piece of paper and write it down. Here's what he says. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and say this last part with me, slow to become angry. In the next verse, he tells us why. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. When you and I live as a way of life and we're just generally angry, it doesn't produce the righteousness of God. We're going to get it wrong. We're getting it wrong if that's the way that we live. We've already moved into sinful anger. The same thing that characterized Jesus' life should characterize our lives. Love. Not anger. And can I just say this as kindly as I know how? If you find yourself in a place right now where you're just going through life with this low grade or even sometimes maybe medium grade anger or even beyond, if it's a way of life for you, you need to know that something is wrong. That's a sign that something is really, really, really wrong. And you need to dig down underneath all that and you need to find out why. And you need to do whatever it takes. If it means you need to schedule an appointment with a pastor, if you need to schedule an appointment with a counselor, or whatever it is, you got to figure that out. Because it's unhealthy, and it's going to wreck your life, and it doesn't produce the righteousness that God intended. So for Jesus, anger wasn't a way of life, which brings me to the second observation I want to make, which is this. Jesus was angry when others were hurt. The thing that made Jesus angry was when others were taken advantage of, when others were mistreated, when others were abused. And this, by the way, is where we normally get derailed when it comes to our anger. Because, let's be honest, most of the things that make us angry are when we feel wronged, when we feel taken advantage of, when somebody says something, when somebody does something, when something doesn't go the way that we want, when something inconveniences us. But that's not what Jesus did. You look throughout the entire Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the biographies of Jesus' life, there were all kinds of terrible things that happened to Jesus, terrible things that people did to him. He was slandered and he was criticized and he was betrayed and he was unfairly persecuted, and in the end he was murdered. But Jesus doesn't seem to become angry about any of that. The thing that makes Jesus angry over and over and over and over and over again are when other people are wronged. Which leads me to some questions I'd like to ask you. What kind of things make you angry nowadays? What kind of things irritate you? What kind of things aggravate you? What kind of things get under your skin? What are the things that cause your blood pressure to rise every time you think about it, or every time you encounter it, or every time it happens? What are the things that cause you to keep a grudge? Jesus was angry when others were hurt. Now don't get me wrong here. I think it's natural to be hurt or even angry when other people wrong us. But as Christ followers, we're not called to do what's natural. We're invited and exhorted and called by God to do supernatural things. So when people wrong us, we're called to forgive the same way that Christ forgives us. Jesus was angry when others were hurt. And we're called to forgive others when they hurt us, but when others are wronged, it's a righteous thing to do to be angry about that. Which brings me to the next observation I want to make, and that's that Jesus attacked problems, not people. I think it's worth noting that when Jesus went into the temple, he flipped tables, not people. He went after the table because the table was the place where the injustice was occurring. The table was the system that perpetuated the injustice. And so Jesus goes after that instead of people. We don't hear about Jesus. He didn't go in there and give them the finger. He didn't go in there and yell at them or cuss them out. He doesn't call them names. He doesn't belittle them. He doesn't get on Facebook, ancient Facebook, whatever that might have been, and tap out a critical post. He doesn't emotionally bully them in any way. He doesn't decide, you know what, I'm canceling you. I'm done with you. I don't agree with you. I don't like you. You disagree with me. This just can't work. We can't be friends anymore. None of that. He attacked the problem, not the person. And for you and I, you know what that means? It means giving people the finger is out of line. It means cussing people out is sinful. It means that calling people names and belittling them is sinful. And it's an inappropriate use of your anger. It means that we shouldn't emotionally bully other people when we're angry. Give them the silent treatment or the cold shoulder so they'll end up doing what we want them to do. That's anger that's out of control. It also means that we shouldn't just go canceling people because we don't like them or we don't agree with them or even if they're outright wrong. I don't know about you, but I am so grateful Jesus never canceled me. And I'm guessing you're grateful he didn't cancel you either. He didn't hate you. He loved you so much, he went and dealt with your sin problem by dying on the cross for your sins. He attacked the problem. And we're called to do the same thing. Jesus attacked problems, not people. One more final observation. Jesus acted instead of reacting. He acted instead of reacted. It's easy to take this story of Jesus and the day that he got angry and come to the conclusion that Jesus showed up on the scene, lost his cool, and started overthrowing tables. But that's not actually what happened. Earlier on in Mark, we read about something that Jesus did the day before he got angry. And here's what we read. Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went to Bethany with the 12. So Jesus shows up the day before, and he sees everything going on that he encountered on the day that he got angry. But he doesn't do anything. He doesn't react to what he sees. He takes a look at it, he takes it in, he gathers the information, and then he goes home. And for 24 hours, he sits on it. He sits on it, and in those 24 hours, it allows the emotions of what he sees and encounters to go down. It allows him to try to figure out, look, am I upset because I feel attacked, or am I upset because other people are being wronged? It gives him time to try to figure out, okay, yes, other people are being wronged. It's appropriate to be angry about that. Okay, now how do I attack problems, not people? And it gave him time to think through all of that. So when Jesus walks in the next day, Jesus is not a man who's wild and out of control. He's a man with a plan, who's acting on a situation rather than reacting to it. Can I tell you this? If you react to your anger, and if I react to, when we react to our anger instead of acting on it, I would guess at least 90% of the time we're going to get it wrong. And we'll do things we regret. All of us have a story. All of us have at least one story where we got angry, we reacted, and we did and said things that we wish we could take back, things we wish we could undo. All of us have a story like that. So can I encourage you to do what Jesus did? Act, don't react. Give it time. Give it 24 hours. But before you send that text, before you send that email, before you say that thing in the moment you really want to say, hit pause and just give it 24 hours. You'd be amazed at the clarity that 24 hours can give you. Yesterday afternoon, I was upset about something, just stupid mad about it. I slept. I woke up this morning and thought to myself, that's a dumb battle to fight. I need to let that go. And all I did was sleep. When you and I give it time, when you and I give it 24 hours, it allows the emotions to go down so we can see it clearly. It allows us to sort out, should I really be angry about this or not? And it allows us to sort out, if I should be angry about this, how do I go about this so that I attack problems and not people? Listen, your anger, it's not sinful to be angry. It's what you do with it that matters. It's what you do with it that will either build and work towards something better or destroy and tear down. So let's find a way in the context in which we live, which is anger-inducing. Let's be honest. The stuff that's happening in our country is very easy to be upset about all of it and live just as angry people. But instead, let's find a way to be angry and not sin. More than anything, I want you and I want me to avoid the destruction that comes when we handle this stuff inappropriately. Next week, we're going to pick up the conversation and we're going to talk about another powerful emotion that, if not handled correctly, it will mess you up. So we'll pick up the conversation next week. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for the reminder, Lord, that this stuff can be toxic It can be dangerous. It can be destructive. God, I say this a lot after a sermon, but this stuff is so easy to talk about and ridiculously difficult to live. It's easy, God, to say that we should be angry and not sin. It's very difficult to actually do that. And God, I think sometimes we think we can do this on our own, but we really can't. We need you. We need your help. So God, I pray that you would just help us when we find ourselves in those moments where the anger emotion begins to rise. God, I pray that you give us a level of awareness, self-awareness about what's going on. God, help us to be aware that in that moment we're standing at a crossroads. And if we go one direction, it destroys. In another direction, it's productive and good. And God, I know that choosing the right path may feel counterintuitive. And it's certainly going to be more difficult than choosing the wrong path. So God, I pray that you give us strength. I pray that you give us wisdom. I pray that you give us discernment. God, and I pray that you would empower us to be people whose lives are marked by love and not anger. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Will you stand and sing with us? Narrow as the road may seem, I'll follow where your spirit leads. Broken as my life may be, I will give you every piece. I hear you call, I am available. I say, yes, Lord, I am available. Here I am with open hands, counting on your grace again. Less of me and more of you. I just wanna see you move. I hear you call, I am available. I say, yes, Lord, I am available. I hear you call, I am available. I say, yes, Lord, I am available.
so much for joining us here today. I have just a couple of announcements, so you can go ahead and be seated. I don't want you to have to stand through my talking. We talked earlier about the children's ministry, and we have had our children's ministry programming running during this 10:30 hour for the last couple of weeks, and we are very excited that our children's ministry programming will now be offered at the 9 o'clock hour as well, starting next week. Because we have to follow regulations regarding COVID, we are asking that you do register your child to attend either the 9 o'clock or the 10:30. Registration to have your child attend will open up tomorrow morning, and registration closes on Friday afternoon. So please make sure that you register your children for either the 9 o'clock or the 10:30, no later than Friday afternoon. The other thing that we have is we are at a time of the year where we typically do our deacon elections and our elder nominations. And normally what we do is we have everyone come together in a church service and we hand out paper ballots and we turn them all in. Well, we really can't do that. We can't invite everybody in like we typically do. So we're going to offer two options this year for everyone to be able to vote for deacon elections and elder nominations. The first way is you can go online. You can go to crossway.news and you can vote there. You can vote also at our church app. Or if it's easier for you, you can mail in your voting ballot. What you'll need to do is call the church office starting tomorrow morning and request one of those ballots. Voting begins as early as tomorrow. Actually, I think you can even vote starting today. I think it's already up. So if you want to vote today, you can. But voting does close on October 25th. So if you're mailing it in, please keep in mind it has to be here at the church no later than October 25th. That's for deacon elections and elder nominations. Make sure you keep in contact with us and all the things we have going on. We have our app and we have crossway.news, and our children's also have their own Facebook page too. So if you don't follow that, I encourage you to do that. Church, we love you so much. Have a great week.